Okay, I think I started it. All right, let me just move these things around. All right, so thanks for participating. I have quite a few clients that are real estate agents. These are typically 1099s that are working for a broker within a larger agency. This has always been like a really interesting legal issue, the real estate agents, and I'll talk a bit more about that and why that is in the presentation. But I've helped a lot of agents over the years. I've helped people build their own brokerages. And obviously real estate, at least in Pennsylvania right now, is in an interesting spot with the shutdowns. I don't know that any closings are going forward. I imagine just down the whole chain, it's probably difficult to get things accomplished. So spring, unfortunately, is usually like a really hot time to be selling homes. Usually there's a ton of money flowing through real estate right now. And so I think there's a lot of agents that aren't quite sure where they fall, especially with all these stimulus packages coming out. They're not sure what's actually going to apply to them, where they should be getting money from their lost income. And I thought I'd put together a presentation for real estate agents to give people an idea of what they might be eligible for and what the financial picture in terms of these stimulus funds and various programs looks like for them. So the title is obviously what 1099 real estate agents need to know about the PPP loan. And we'll go into that. So let me just advance this slide. All right. So if you don't know me, if you're not a current client, if you've never been a client, I'm a business attorney. I have my own law firm where I've helped nothing but small business owners for the past 6.5 years. I only help business owners. I don't help consumers. I help people get businesses set up. I help them hire employees, register trademarks, contracts, and over the years, I've helped quite a few real estate investors. So I've circulated with agents, people in the mortgage, title, and the investors. So it's quite a different gamut of clients that kind of run the spectrum. But like I said in the beginning, I have helped quite a few real estate agents over the years as well. All right, so what is the PPP loan? Most people have heard about this now. It's in the news basically every day since it was signed into law. The PPP that we abbreviated is really the Paycheck Protection Program. This was signed into law as part of the CARES Act, which is part of the coronavirus financial relief packages, mostly for business owners and 1099s. It also had some unemployment provisions to it. And PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, it's a loan that is dispersed through a bank. So this is not the one that you go to the SBA.gov website and apply for. This is the one that you go to a bank. However, the loan is backed by the SBA. So it's the SBA guaranteeing the funds, but this particular one you get through a bank. Now, if you've been reading the news, you know that the rollout of this program has been very difficult. The banks who are still sort of hurting from the hit they took during the mortgage crisis were very skeptical and hesitant to loan business owners money under this program. If you're a real estate agent, I'm sure you recall that the reason a lot of these mortgage companies got into big trouble during the meltdown in 2008 was because they did all those no-doc loans, meaning they gave people a lot of mortgages that maybe shouldn't have got mortgages, and they weren't verifying a lot of financial information. This new PPP looks a lot like that on its face, in that the government is telling the banks to loan this money to business owners with very little guidance as to what they're supposed to verify. So the banks, having been burnt not that long ago by the government and the penalties, were understandably very resistant and hesitant to start loaning money to business owners under this program. So that's why you will see a lot of lenders have refused to issue loans to people that are not already existing business customers. At least when the loan first came out, and all this is very new. This stuff is like 2 weeks old, 10 days old maybe. Bank of America was one of the first banks that had the applications available. However, they had some very narrow restrictions in that They would not agree to do a loan application for anyone that didn't already have not only a business bank account with them, but some type of debt, meaning a credit card, a commercial loan. It wasn't enough to even just have a business banking account with them. They wanted to make sure they already had, vetted you. They knew what your financial profile looked like. They particularly knew what your ability to repay debt profile looked like. And that's the reason that you'll find some difficulties in getting a bank to maybe do this loan for you. Now, I've had a number of people with success already getting a bank to give them the application. I've even heard of some people already having their loans approved and expecting funds this week. It's a very slow process because right now, quite honestly, the banks are totally overwhelmed with this. They're getting thousands upon thousands of applications. They're bringing in more staff to deal with the applications. So number one would be you want to try with your own bank, first of all, to see if they'll do the loan for you. Absent that, every day more and more banks are kind of coming online with this. Some of the original banks are reopening applications that they closed after the initial deluge. So you can keep checking back with the big guys like Wells Fargo, Bank of America. I know Citizens Bank finally got on board and started offering the applications to their customers. First Trust, I know, will do it for their customers. And then there's also like a not federal, but a private company. It's not a bank, so they don't do like any kind of consumer accounts. It's called Fountainhead. And in fact, all they do are SBA loans and small business loans. And that's what they did before the crisis. And that's what they're doing now. And they've been one of the more cautious lenders, just insofar as waiting maybe a little bit longer to get the applications going. But if you don't have a bank and you're having trouble finding a bank, you could check out Fountainhead. And if you like, I can find you a link to that after the presentation today. Let me see if I can just quickly find the link in my notes and give you, okay, it looks like it's Fountainhead, FOUNTAINHEADCC.com. So that's the one. It's not a bank, but they are doing these loans. You don't have to be a current customer, and they have their own application ready to go. So if you can't find a bank, you can try Fountainhead. Okay, so let's go to the next one. All right, why would a PPP loan make sense for a 1099 real estate agent? Sorry, we've got this on a delay. Okay, so this is the interesting legal part about the real estate agents that I mentioned in the beginning. 1099 real estate agent is typically not eligible for things like unemployment. That is because they're not an employee of anybody. So when all this crisis stuff started happening, 1099s have been such a big part of the economy for the last maybe, 8 years or so, that at least the government recognized these are people that are going to have trouble getting financial relief. And that's typically because they're not a business owner and they're not an employee. So what do we do with them? Well, that's where these potential PPPs can come into play here. And so what they did under the CARES Act is a 1099 real estate agent is normally not somebody that's eligible for unemployment compensation. However, as part of the new laws, if you're a 1099 real estate agent, you can now either file for unemployment compensation or apply for the PPP loan. And this ends up being what the dilemma is, like which one would you do, which one makes sense to you? And that requires a much deeper analysis based on your own case. But let's at least, most people understand what unemployment is and how that works, but let's talk about both a little bit more in depth and the benefits and the drawbacks, and then also so that you understand what the PPP is and why maybe you'd want to do that over unemployment. So as I mentioned, typically as a 1099, you would not be eligible for unemployment. And this presentation is tailored to people in Pennsylvania. So if you happen to not be in Pennsylvania, you would want to contact your own state's unemployment. But this, the CARES Act is a federal law. So at least in Pennsylvania, they're calling it now PUC, I think, which is for pandemic unemployment compensation. So if you actually were to go to the unemployment website in the state of Pennsylvania, there's like the regular way that normal W-2s would apply for unemployment. And at least the last word was that for 1099s, they want them to use a separate link to apply for unemployment. And what the federal government has done is whatever your base unemployment would have been, which is calculated based on your pay, the federal government has authorized an additional $600 per week to that base through July 31st, 2020. This is, for unemployment, really an incredible amount of money. I think in Pennsylvania, the max unemployment per week is like a little over $500. So that could be potentially a lot of money somebody could get on unemployment. Now, if you're still working, or if you are working and doing something else other than real estate, you do have to disclose that and how much you're getting paid. And it doesn't mean that you're not going to qualify for the unemployment. It just means that whatever amount you'd be entitled to is typically reduced by what you're earning. So if your hours have not been completely cut, but have been drastically reduced, unemployment might be something you are now eligible for. They've also dropped the requirements of unemployment that have to do with the work search requirement. Like typically you would be required to actively be applying for new work while you're on unemployment. They have dropped that. So the $600 a week is only for a limited period. That's through July 31st. However, I think the state of Pennsylvania has also generally extended the time for base unemployment. So if you think that unemployment is something that could benefit you, I would urge you to reach out to the system and see, what that application process looks like and get that in. Hold on, we've got a question in the chat real quick. Okay, so people ask about, they've got deals closing and what they do about unemployment. So this is like the real big problem with the 1099s. Allowing 1099s to apply for unemployment is really unprecedented. People have done it before, usually when they're angry at whoever's employing them, and they use it as a way to gain leverage as part of a misclassification argument. So I think that if you've got deals closing and you're still getting money in, I think you could apply for unemployment because you don't have anything in the pipeline, right? If the whole system's cut off and nothing's closing for the next couple of months, and you're just going to have to disclose to them how much you've made and on what dates you receive those payments. And then they're going to adjust what they think your benefit should be accordingly. Like, I don't think there's really a set rule right now for this. It's very new. Let me just check the chat. Yeah, so I would, first of all, consider whether you're going to do unemployment or the PPP. So let's talk about PPP real quick so that you can figure out which one would be more financially beneficial to you. So with unemployment, you're always going to run the risk that at some point they're going to consider maybe, this is April. Okay, you have 3 houses finally close in April, but now nothing is going to close for you in May or June. With unemployment, you're just gonna have to say, look, I had 3 close in April, but I have no money coming up in May and June. So potentially, are you then eligible to get compensation for May and June? And I think what you wanna do if you decide not to go for PPP is just get that unemployment application in, and then just make sure you're transparent and disclosing what money did come in the date. And then, like I said, I think they would adjust your entitlement accordingly. All right, but PPP, so unemployment is definitely an option now for you as a 1099 agent. But the second option available to you is the Paycheck Protection Program loan. Now, to me, this is interesting for a 1099, and you're going to have to, do the math on this to see if it makes sense for you. So the Paycheck Protection Program loan is a loan. Make no mistake about it. We're going to talk about in a minute that there is a forgivable component to it, but it is in fact a loan. So what you would do is you take your 1099 miscellaneous earnings for 2019 and you divide them by 12, and you got to cap it at 100,000. So let's say your earnings last year, let's see, I did a sample earlier. Let me see what I used. I got to use a calculator, but okay, let's say that last year you made $60,000 in your 1099 miscellaneous earnings. We take the 60,000 and we divide it by 12. So that's 5,000 a month you were earning in your 1099 miscellaneous income. Now we take the 5,000 per month and we multiply it by 2.5 to get the max PPP loan amount that you'd be eligible for. So 5,000 times 2.5 is $12,500. And what that $12,500 is meant for is it's meant to cover 8 weeks of payroll. And it gets sticky because as a 1099, you are not likely paying yourself through a payroll. You don't own a business. You probably don't have a payroll company set up. You're probably just putting the money either in your personal account or somewhere else and calling it a day. Whether that's the best way that you should have been doing that all along is debatable. Often what we've done for real estate agents is in fact set them up with their own LLC for liability purposes. And then if they have a good accountant, they might be taxed as an S Corp and they might in fact be on a payroll. If any of what I just said doesn't make any sense to you, you don't even know what I'm talking about, you just get your 1099 checks and you deposit them in your personal account, then that's okay. Maybe for the future, we'll talk about, how you can make that different, but that's essentially the amount of this loan. And again, that's meant to cover 8 weeks of your payroll. So $12,500 would be the amount then that you have to show you paid yourself over the 8-week period. And why? Why would you have to do that? Well, because the PPP is a forgivable loan. There's a lot of caveats to that though. The biggest one being you have to use at least 75% of that money on payroll. So that $12,500, 75% of that has to go through the payroll. Because there are like a couple other limited things that you'd be allowed to use that money for. For example, if you were renting an office for your space, you could also allocate it to rent. If you were paying utilities in your office, you could use some of that money to pay that. But if you, for example, used 50% of it to pay rent on your office, now that extra 25% is not forgivable because 75, again, has to be used on the payroll. Okay, how do we get the loan forgiven? We don't know yet. Nobody knows. The Treasury hasn't written the regs on this yet. Let me date this video. It's April 13th. So what I will tell you is this PPP and the regs, they literally change every day. Every day the Treasury Department sends out more guidelines to the banks, more regulations. Last week I was a panelist on a panel hosted by Goldman Sachs. It was myself and 2 other employees of the SBA. And quite honestly, the people from the SBA knew about as much as I did with regard to these loans. And what they're telling people is talk to your lender, talk to your lender, and talk to your lender, because your lender is going to be the one processing that paperwork for the loan forgiveness. So what we're telling people is if you end up getting one of these PPP loans, make sure you keep excellent records. You know how when you buy a house and you need to show them your down payment funds and they source all those funds, meaning if you show them a bank statement with 50 grand sitting in it and they see that the 50 grand was just deposited last week, they go back through all your bank records to figure out where that 50 grand actually originated, right? Same thing here. Like if you start paying things and depositing things and you can't trace that money back from the loan to the payroll, you're going to have, I imagine, a world of hurt getting this forgiven in the end. So what we try to tell people to do is if you get one of these loans, put those funds in a separate account. Very clearly then you can show where the source of the funds originated and you can show what you're doing with the funds. And then, like I said, if you're not set up as an entity, you're not paying yourself through payrolls and S Corp, you were just doing the deposits and draws to yourself, you just take that money from the separate account and then do it as a draw into your bank account as you normally would. Now, run all of that by your banker. And specifically when you get this loan, talk to your banker and tell them, look, I'm a 1099. I didn't have an entity set up. I would just take my payments and put them in my personal bank account. How do you want me to record everything with the loan funds so that I can get this forgiven in 8 weeks? Make sure you ask these questions up front, because what you don't want to do is be just putting that money in your personal bank account and then at the end of 8 weeks having to somehow go back and prove that you use this for payroll. So run this by your bank, because you being a 1099 in this situation is very unique and it's very difficult to predict how it's going to go, because technically if you were doing what I just said, that's not really a true payroll, right? Those are just earned income, maybe ownership distributions. So talk to the bank very carefully about what they want to see with your particular loan in order to get this forgiven in 8 weeks. Now, what happens if this loan is not forgiven in 8 weeks? Well, it's not the end of the world. It truly remains a loan, albeit a loan on very favorable terms. The terms are 1% interest, payable over 2 years, and the payments don't start for 6 months. So God forbid you get a loan, you mess up your records, it doesn't get forgiven, you use too much of it towards your rent. Assuming the loan isn't gigantic, that's not that bad. You know, you're stuck with a loan at 1% interest for 2 years, you don't have any payments for 6 months. But like, you know, this is a situation where it's just stupid to be sloppy, because a forgivable loan is, you know, almost unheard of. And if you can get it forgiven, you should. Now, like if you are a 1099 real estate agent and you had someone working for you, maybe you had an assistant that you were paying. If you were paying them as a W-2 and you had payroll with yourself as a 1099, you could include that amount. You could keep paying your assistant. I imagine for most of you, that's not really the situation. I think most of the brokers are paying the assistants. So that probably doesn't apply, but just keep that in mind, that any payroll wages you were paying to anyone else as part of your quote unquote, you know, business would also be able to be included here. Hold on, one question in the chat. Okay, EIDL. All right, yeah, I will address the EIDL briefly. So the EIDL, that is the Economic Impact Disaster Loan. That's not the PPP, it's a totally separate program. Now the EIDL is in fact administered and funded directly by the SBA. And that's the loan, if you go to the website of the SBA.gov, that's the one with the really simplified, streamlined application at the top. And that's the one that claims they will do up to a $10,000 advance. So what that one is, basically we haven't heard anybody get approved for that loan yet, get funded for that loan yet. Nobody's gotten the advance yet. And when I was on that panel last week with the 2 people from SBA, their response to all that was call the 1-800 or 888 SBA number to find out the status of your loan. So we don't know what that's doing right now. The only thing you have to keep in mind if you're doing both the PPP and the EIDL loan is that they can't be used for the same purpose. So for example, if you're going to get a PPP and use it to pay yourself and payroll, you cannot use the EIDL for the same thing. The EIDL, though, could be used for working capital. It can be used for your overhead. It could be used for rent, you know, but you just can't use it to also pay yourself. So the EIDL also has, in terms of a business loan, very favorable terms, terms that we don't see typically. It has a 3.75% interest rate for a for-profit business. We're not sure quite what the repayment term is going to be, but they're intended to be longer-term loans, like 10 to 30 years, depending on how much money you're getting. You do not specify the amount of money you want to borrow. The SBA is going to determine how much money they're going to give you. There's not going to be payments for, I believe it's a year. The payments won't kick in for a year. And the $10,000 advance, we don't actually know anybody that has an idea of what's going on with that. But just be aware that the language says up to $10,000. So I think very few people, based on the number that we know from public records, have applied so far. I doubt that most people are going to get a $10,000 advance. So we're not quite sure what the status of that loan is yet. If you talk to SBA, they'll tell you to call the 800 number. My guess is that a lot of those loans are going to be processed and dispersed in May. So if you have short-term financial needs right now, the PPP with the private banks doing it, we're just hearing more success with people actually getting those funds and getting the loans approved more quickly right now. Okay, so that's the EIDL loan. So just remember, EIDL loan and PPP, they're both part of this federal stimulus package. PPP, though, you get through a bank. It's potentially forgivable after 8 weeks if you meet the terms and conditions. EIDL, it's a regular SBA business loan. You apply through SBA. You can, in fact, get both. You just can't use both for the same purpose. All right, so which one do you choose? So if you're a 1099 agent, what do? Do you go on unemployment? Do you get a PPP loan? That's really the tough question. And it's really a question of doing the math and looking at the financials to figure out which one would actually benefit you. The unemployment compensation, it's going to last longer potentially because they've extended the period of time that you can collect. Don't forget they have that whopping $600 federal kicker on top of whatever your rate is. But don't forget that any earnings are actually going to reduce your benefits. And again, we don't know how they're going to calculate that with you being a 1099. It's just totally up in the air. Also, unemployment, at least from what I've heard of people in the past couple of weeks, is somewhat of a, I don't know what to say on a webinar, like basically a shit show recently in terms of getting the applications processed and things being timely. So you're relying on the state to disperse the unemployment. And, that's just the risk you run. Eventually, the system will catch up and you'll get your money, but, keep that in mind. All right, PPP requires a loan application with a lender. You should be reaching out to lenders now to see what's on their application. The application that the government came out with was not terribly onerous, I thought. It looked fairly simple and streamlined. But the banks on top of that have their own applications and their own data that they want to see. And from what I've heard from a couple people, certain banks want quite a bit of information that's quite detailed. So check with the lender to see what they're asking for right now. Okay, PPP, another downside to it potentially is it requires some really good records in order for you to get that forgiveness after 8 weeks. So if you're somebody that's like not the best at bookkeeping, like this sounds like a hassle to you, you got to figure out a way to deal with it and trace all that money. Otherwise, you're not going to get the forgiveness. All right, if you need any further help from me or you want to set up, a quick 10-minute call to chat, there's no obligation. Here's my contact info. That's the website. That's the email address, the phone number, our Facebook handle. I will post this recording on YouTube. So if you have other real estate agent friends, we'll put it out there for people to view for free. And I think our YouTube channel might be Holmes Business Law, but again, we'll put a link on the website so if you need to find it and give to anybody else. But, just try to do your financials. If you have a great accountant, if you have a bookkeeper, sometimes financial advisors will go over your numbers with you. Just see under what scenario things are going to shake out better for you. Now, don't forget unemployment. Like, should you become employed again, that's going to cut off, or reduce your benefits. So if this is April, we're not quite sure when people are going to be back to work, when the economy is going to be restarting. Hopefully for people like real estate agents, that stuff can come back quickly, but we just never know. So think about the different numbers, run them by, your professional financial people. And again, if you need any help from me, any future information, feel free to reach out and also monitor our website. We post new videos every day about the different programs and different information we're getting. Okay, so if anybody has any other questions, I'll give you about 30 seconds to drop them in a chat. Otherwise, again, just feel free to reach out on your own. And I hope we are all back to business very soon. All right, just one chat. Hold on one sec. Okay. All right, yeah, and please share the presentation with your other real estate agent friends. Okay, well, thanks so much, everybody. And I hope to see you when the economy is back and booming and we are all, quote unquote, back to normal, whatever that's going to look like. Okay, thanks so much. Oh, hold on, one more tab. Oh, okay, someone's asking about PPP and UC taxable. No, the word so far is not taxable. So you should be okay there. But again, check, like I said, the regulations change every day. If that loan doesn't get forgiven, that PPP, I don't know. We got to see what the regs say. They're trying to make everything as advantageous for people as they can, which is quite unusual. But check the regs. So far, though, the word on the street was that these things are not supposed to be taxable. With unemployment, though, you definitely want to make sure and look at the application. They've totally changed the website on unemployment right now. They have a very intensive FAQ on there, so I would check that and see if the unemployment wages are going to be taxable or not. Okay? All right, so we will see you again. Hold on, one more chat. Okay, yeah. All right, everybody, have a great rest of your day and hang in there.